Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and we're going to dive into another true story today. It was a normal, typical day in May in Clinton, Oklahoma, when a woman named Jan Vaughn, she got up in the morning, did her normal routine, and her husband Larry, he was away for work on a business trip. He took them quite frequently, and so she got her girls ready. Brooke and Brenda were their names, and got them all set, breakfast, took them to school. She loaded up their Ford Explorer, and off they went for the day. After dropping the girls off, she went on to where she worked full-time as a florist. And it was on this day in May that Jan says her life would be forever changed. In addition, when Jan was taking the girls to school, she was, in a rush like anybody is in the morning, right? Especially if you're a mom. So she just had a bunch of jumbled thoughts of all the things she needed to do for the day. And she wasn't really thinking or paying attention about putting on a seatbelt. In fact, she even remembers hearing like a little voice kind of inside reminding her, hey, put your seatbelt on. She ignored it though. And just as they were entering town, they were coming upon a stop sign, and another man ran the stop sign and ran straight into them. Well, Jan did fly forward, hit her head on the windshield, which made it crack, and it gave Jan just a throbbing headache. Now she turned around to look back at her girls, and thankfully, they were unharmed. They did not have a scratch or anything wrong. So that was good. And Jan will even tell you, hey, it was a miracle that her girls were not harmed, because the way the story read when I was reading this for the first time, it sounded as if the girls didn't have seatbelts on either. But I can't verify that. I don't know. So if that's the case, that's even a bigger miracle that the girls didn't get hurt. Now, when this little accident occurred, the fire chief was called. Now, this was a small town, so all the fire department was volunteer. In fact, her husband Larry was a volunteer firefighter, but again, he was out of town. So word kind of spread pretty quickly once the fire chief was called that, hey, one of the families that has a husband that's a volunteer was harmed in a car accident. So they actually all come out, all the volunteers, to check on Jan and the girls just to, make sure all was well. Jan was taken to the hospital to treat, her head that when she hit it on the windshield. And, she told the doctors about her throbbing headache, and they said, that's normal. It's going to take some time, but the pain will subside. Everything else checked out, no major injuries. And so they gave her some pain pills and just sent her on her way, told her to go home, get some rest. Jan says this whole accident and the head injury and everything, that was the start of her new life with migraines. And for those that are migraine sufferers, me included, I know how horrific that pain can be. Jan says that sometimes the pain from her migraines would be so severe that there were times she'd actually pass out because of it. And there was times whether Larry, if he was in town, her husband, and if not, then a family friend would have to take her to the ER for treatment when these migraines did attack and get pretty severe. The little hospital was, used to seeing Jan come in quite frequently for treatment when these things would flare. One evening, it was on a Wednesday night in a church service, she was sitting there listening to the sermon, and that's when the pain began. And it started to throb, and it increasingly got worse and fast. And she knew, gosh, I gotta leave. I gotta get out of here. So she quietly and slowly gets up from the pew, turns around, starts to head her way back out of the back of the sanctuary. Well, she's just about to walk out that back door, and that's when she passes out right near the last row of pews. People rush to her aid, try to arouse her, wake her up, make sure she's okay, because they didn't really know what was going on, and they couldn't wake her up. So they had to call 911, and paramedics came, and that meant another trip to the ER. Over the next few years, whenever her husband Larry would travel, he wanted to make sure his girls and his wife were safe. He didn't want them staying by themselves because, you see, they lived out in the countryside. So it was a bit of ways out there, and he didn't feel safe, just leaving them there by themselves, especially what if Jan had a bad migraine attack. So whenever he did leave town, he trusted this family friends. They were a couple that actually attended the church they went to. And Jan and the two girls would stay with this couple, for a few days whenever that would occur. So that was kind of a blessing during that time. Also during this time, Jan just really, really struggled. I mean, you think, gosh, somebody that's suffering from almost daily migraines, and she's trying to deal with that. But she's also juggling a full-time job as a florist. She tried to help out with the mini church camps at their church, and she's trying to raise her own two girls. So she's juggling several things, and she's trying to do it the best of her ability with all this debilitating pain. She said there were times, she wanted to walk right outside, and she did. She tried it to just get some fresh air, only to have that sun blaring down in her face, which would then bring about another migraine. And I can attest to that because that does happen to me sometimes with migraines. They're not as severe as they once were, thank goodness, but man, it does. Something about that when you're a sufferer with migraines, if you've got one going, light, unfortunately, just makes it worse. It does. It makes it throb quite a bit. So when this would happen to Jan, she'd just have to go right back inside, lay down in a cool, dark room, and try to just cope with the pain the best she could. There were even times she's, working her normal full-time job and one would flare up. She'd have to ask her boss if, hey, can I go lay down for a few minutes, because the pain would be so severe and she'd be trying to do her job. So, it was just tiring having to constantly ask that of her job. But what else can you do when the pain is that bad? So months would go by. Another prescription would be added to her regimen, and another, and another. And then those start to add up. Those have side effects. So then you're adding another prescription to take care of that side effect. And it's a constant cycle. Due to all the prescriptions she was taking and the side effects, Jan started to gain weight. Not only that, but her personality started to change. She wasn't the same old Jan at all. Jan says during these few years, she prayed all the time about it, but that unfortunately her suffering it didn't subside. She eventually came to the conclusion, all right, this is my life now. And this, I just have to deal. There came an October where Larry and Jan, they had volunteered to help out with a friend's wedding. And so Larry had been doing some of the video and Jan was helping with other things. And they started having a good time at the reception, and bam, that's when the throbbing begins in Jan's head. It escalated pretty quickly, and Jan walked up to her husband and said, "Oh, we gotta go. I gotta leave. This is starting to throb really bad." And so they're starting to gather up their things and get ready to go when a longtime friend named Veronica Peters walks up to the couple. She asked how Jan was doing, which Jan replied, "Not well. We're going to have to leave," which Veronica was a long-time friend, so she knew about Jan's migraines and her battle with them, so she understood. But before they left, she said, "Well, wait one second. Let me get my son, Colby. He can pray over you before you go, because he has the gift of healing." And so Jan's like, okay, that's fine. So Veronica's waving her son down to, come over her way, and Colby comes right over, and he, being Veronica's son, also knew about Jan's struggle with migraines. So he gathers a few people nearby and says, hey, come over this way. And he tells them, the group, all right, we're going to pray over Jan. We're going to pray about her migraines, that they leave, and we're going to command them to leave in Jesus' name. So they pray, they do exactly that. And Jan says she felt no different. She felt the same, and the throbbing pain was there. It was getting worse. And so they said their goodbyes, and Larry took Jan home. The next morning comes. Jan, she wakes up and immediately knows a difference. She's kind of chipper, and she swings her legs out of bed, hops right up, and she's like, wait a second, I don't have a headache. Why is my head not throbbing? She knew, like I said, immediately something's very off, but in a good way. She was shocked by this. So 3 days go by. Those 3 days, no pain, no headache, no migraine, no nothing. Jan didn't even have to take any of the numerous medications that she normally did for her headaches. Jan says this was unheard of for her. She'd never gone 3 days. She could barely go 1 day without a headache. Wow. So after those 3 days had passed, Jan, she believed that prayer worked and that her headaches and migraines were gone. She ended up throwing away every last prescription that she had, and she never needed them again. 4 more years passed, and throughout that whole 4-year period, at the time of the writing of this story in the book I got it from, no headaches, no migraines. Jan still never needed any of those medications, and she's been free of them ever since. Larry later on had a conversation with Colby, who had prayed over her that night, and he told him, hey, I've got my Janny back. This is amazing. And so it was just a real cool thing, to see how that must have been to see somebody's personality slowly come back after they had been what seemed like they were gone for years, just because they were always feeling sick and all the medications on top of that changing everything. So I just thought this was a really neat story, and I personally could relate to it as well. What do you guys think? And did you enjoy it? Had you ever suffered with migraines yourself? Because I know they can be awful. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and hello to all the new subscribers. There was quite a few new ones last week, so that was exciting to me. And welcome. Hope you enjoy these true stories, and I will see you guys for the next one.